Greetings. I am the librarian, and I have joyous news. The following report was recently recovered from previously lost intelligence archives located in post-war France. Until the 30th of April, 1945, a monolithic titan had terrorized Europe through years of the most horrific atrocities and diabolical means of warfare the likes of humanity had ever known. The death of Hitler sent shockwaves through the ailing state of Nazi Germany, the most irreconcilable of the Third Reich fighting on for the last bitter days of the war, while many German soldiers defected. One such defecting soldier, known only by the surname Krenz, later provided by Soviet intelligence, shared a harrowing story of the days soon before Nazi Germany's surrender, during which an extraordinary incident occurred: the appearance of a bizarre scientific anomaly in the heart of Berlin. Krenz, an ordinary soldier of the Wehrmacht ground forces, had been removed from active conflict with strict orders from Central Command to guard a laboratory which supposedly contained vital state secret information. It was in spite of the closing war, in which defeat of the Nazi regime was imminent, that Krenz and 3 other soldiers were assigned to guard the secret work of state scientists. The date at which Krenz and his fellow soldiers were moved to the laboratory is disputed. However, the most reasonable estimates place it around the 21st of April, just 9 days before the suicide of the Nazi leader. Partial diary entries later recovered at the scene of the incident reveal a confused and anxious group of soldiers, not sure what the meaning of their assignment was, and likewise the fear of defeat and persecution loomed large. Not even 2 weeks later, Hitler committed suicide. As the Nazi state crumbled, a war-torn Germany was left in complete disarray. Krenz allegedly reported the scientists in particular behaving erratically and then in complete hysteria, without telling the soldiers what was going on. Then, on the 2nd of May, the scientists called a high-alert emergency meeting in the heart of the laboratory compound. Krenz and his men were told of a being that scientists had been studying, and even in contact with. They described it through fearful words, claimed that the being had been present in the folklore of Germany and Prussia for centuries, and that Hitler himself had taken a keen personal interest in its research, only that by the time the scientists had contacted the being, there was no apparent means of severing the connection, the relationship which had been forged. The entity, sometimes known in German legend as Der Grossmann or Der Ritter, was said to be an impossibly tall, faceless entity with grotesque, elongated limbs and abilities far beyond feeble human comprehension. Whenever the entity chose to appear before them, it did so wearing a black-as-night suit, covered in artifacts from the forest floor, fragments of branches, and remains of old foliage. The scientists then revealed that their Ritter had appeared before them on a multitude of occasions, even causing one of the previous laboratory guards to disappear for several hours before he was found in a room locked from the outside. deliriously mumbling to himself. They then discovered that the guard had gone blind and deaf, apparently only through the influence of Der Ritter. Fearing that they had angered the entity, the scientists demanded extra protection from the Wehrmacht, only to receive the few soldiers that could be spared. One soldier allegedly asked what could be so important about guarding the laboratory, when Der Ritter seemed invulnerable. And the scientist replied that they had conducted extensive studies on the entity, which included the research of weaponizing its interdimensional properties to create a weapon of horrific and awesome power. Before such a weapon could come to be, however, Der Ritter had imposed its vengeful will upon the compound. All that could be done after such a damnation would be to safeguard the research from falling into the hands of the Allies. The scientists had collectively decided to inform the soldiers of the entire situation due to the nature of the war and the matter of containment. This was to be the final mission of Krenz and his men. For the remainder of their assignment, the soldiers were completely restless, driven to the brink of mental breakdowns from the talk of Der Ritter, as well as the dire state of the war. Krenz and his men were increasingly at odds with the scientists and the failing Nazi regime as a whole. His entire group having supposedly been young draftees of the war rather than fascist ideologues. According to the known diary entries collected at the scene, Krenz was actively plotting a revolt against the scientists when the day of the incident arrived. Krenz directed 2 of his men to guard the only entrance of the high-security compound, to prevent any scientists from fleeing, while he and the 4th soldier would confront the science team in the high-clearance labs, where no guards were permitted. This went as planned, initially. Krenz and his fellow soldier burst into the high-clearance lab without triggering any alarms, only to find the secretive place empty of all scientists. Deeply confused, Krenz searched the secret lab for the missing scientists, only to find several of the head researchers locked in rooms from the outside, each and every one of them found staring at the walls. Realizing the dire situation, Krenz urged his comrade to escape with him as soon as possible, for fear of Der Ritter assaulting their senses, as it had certainly done to the science team. It was as they began their escape attempt that the blood-curdling screams of the other 2 guards rang out through the compound, followed by the unmistakable chorus of gunfire. Krenz raced to the entrance and discovered a most disturbing scene. Der Ritter, the twisted man, taller than imaginable, with 2 protruding arms impaling either soldier, the both of them gasping for air, as they certainly had their lungs punctured by the entity's horrible arms. Krenz watched in terror as his men writhed and breathed their final struggled breaths before Der Ritter turned its head towards him, its neck cracking as if being broken. Krenz then experienced what he described as a sensation of an exploding head, as his senses were assaulted, blacking out immediately after. Hours later, Krenz awoke to find the mutilated corpses of his 3 fellow soldiers. The lab had been hit in an Allied bombing raid, the entirety of the compound having collapsed, save for a small area where Krenz and his men had encountered Der Ritter, and luckily, the entrance. Krenz escaped the building and wandered the war-torn streets of Berlin in a daze until discovered by assaulting American troops, to whom he turned himself in. His survival was deemed remarkable by the Americans, Kryns, however, would later claim that he had been selected. After revealing all of his information to the Allied authorities, Kryns underwent an extensive period of psychotherapy involving deep hypnosis. Kryns, when hypnotized, described an out-of-body experience while he was blacked out in the compound. The feeling of an astral projection, but in the midst of a world that was beyond him or anything else conceivable by mankind. In this state, Kryns reported ancient cities and vast forests, particularly the innermost woods where people rarely traveled. There he witnessed beings interacting on planes of reality greater, more fantastical than that of man. And one of them was der Ritter, a being which he became convinced was not the destructor the scientists had believed it to be, but rather a godlike entity, attempting to communicate with people, tiny, insignificant, ignorant people. In his sleep, Kryns would frequently cry, "The forest! It came from the forest." Shortly after the period of therapeutic hypnosis, Kryns died of unidentified causes in Paris, where he had been treated. For decades, the truth of his experiences have been debated behind closed doors. Nonetheless, the horrors Kryns had seen and the things he told us remain. This leaked intelligence archive confirms many of our beliefs. These scientists wanted to use one of our gods. They wanted its power, and in return they were slaughtered. But this one man planned to stand against the scientists, and our God rewarded him with his life, and by taking him through an ark. This is truly a most holy tale, and will be regarded in our records for all time. Praise the prophets, the great beings of the beyond. Take us through your arks, so that we may be complete and serve you. Praise the Father, praise him.